Good evening, everybody. My name is Scott Jacobs, and you're listening to Juiced Sports Radio. And the day that Peyton Manning and the Indianapolis Colts part ways, after 14 seasons, after being drafted number 1 overall in the 1998 NFL Draft, two have parted ways in an emotional press conference. Joining me here to break it down is Mike Kay. Mike, what did you make of the press conference?
I mean, I thought it was really emotional, and it definitely lamented the relationship between Peyton Manning and the Colts and Jim Irsay. I thought it was tastefully done. I thought it was the right thing to do to have them let them both speak and look amicable from their departure. And it's a better send off for Peyton than I think a lot of people expected.
What will you remember most about the Peyton Manning era in Indianapolis?
He is the best quarterback of our generation. You could compare him to Joe Montana. You can compare him to Johnny Unitas. You can compare him to some of the greats. He got it from the moment he was there. Yeah, they went 3-13 his first year, and he led the league in interceptions. But the next year, he went 13-3 and really just turned on the jet. I mean, he was an incredible leader and an incredible passer.
He has been the poster child for number 1 drafted quarterbacks ever since his arrival into the NFL. Extremely hyped, 4-year player out of Tennessee. Manning won everything but a national championship as a Vol. Came into the NFL with huge expectations, and I'd say he exceeded them all by a country mile. And, when you look back at his career, he didn't win as many Super Bowls, I think, as many thought he might have, coming into the 2000s when the Colts started their unprecedented Atlanta Braves-like run of success. But I think the Braves are an interesting team to compare him to because the Braves won a lot of games with the same core, and a lot of times they weren't able to finish off the championship that they wanted. But when I look back at Manning and just how well he handled things and how he changed things at the huddle and how, Edgar and James and Marvin Harrison and Reggie Wayne and Jeff Saturday and all these guys that became household names because Manning made them great. It's not that they weren't good players already, but as we saw when he went to Arizona, Edgar and James was not the same player without Peyton Manning. And we saw some of these Colts receivers, how they weren't the same guys when Manning was hurt last season. So Manning's value to the team and to the city and getting them that stadium and the Super Bowl this year cannot be understated. However, I do understand where the Colts are coming from. Do you believe they made the right decision?
I think you have to do what Peyton and Irsay did and look at the factors. You've got a 35, almost a 36-year-old quarterback who's coming off major neck surgery multiple times. Your franchise looks like it's an expansion team outside of Peyton and Dallas Clark because they're the only ones that are actually under contract for next year. I mean, as of now, I guess Peyton's not on there. You've got the number 1 pick in the draft. It's going to be Andrew Luck. Got to feel really good about that. They're going to seamlessly go from Peyton Manning to Andrew Luck with just 1 year in between. That's a pretty fortunate organization, in my opinion. And I think Irsay had to look at it from, do we wage our future on the next 2 seasons when we know we're not ready to compete for a Super Bowl, even with Peyton Manning?
I think a lot of people feel like, well, this came down to money, and that's what the media has been saying. And I'm sure part of it has to do with $28 million roster bonus he was owed. But at the same time, with the Colts sort of cleaning house and getting a new coach, a new GM, and getting rid of a lot of the veterans that have been there for so long, I think it was just time. Manning said all good things must come to an end. Sports is, at its heart, a business. And it's not just the fact that it was about the money, because they could have restructured the contract, and I firmly believe that. I think it was just the Colts were looking to start rebuilding. They realized they were a team that was a long ways away, and even with Manning, they probably only get 10 wins tops and maybe get into the first round of the playoffs. And I think they sort of realized that they sort of had maxed out their team and that it was ready to start over, and they had the number 1 pick, and I think it makes sense for them. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, they're hovering around the cap. They've got a lot of free agents, spread themselves kind of thin. If you look at what Dwight Freeney owed this year, I believe it's between $17 and $19 million, and that's a huge cap number for a guy in his 30s. So you counter that with $25+ million that Peyton's owed. It's not the right way to run a franchise at this point. If they were both in their mid to late 20s, it would be fine. But Peyton's coming off serious surgery, and, due to a provision in the CBA, they can't watch him throw before the league year starts. The problem with that is that his bonus is due on the 8th, and that's 5 days before free agency starts, which is when the new year starts. So they were put in a bind, and I think they had to make this move.
It's tough getting rid of a superstar that has defined your team. I genuinely felt that Irsay was sad when he was getting choked up during the press conference. I thought it was tastefully done. I liked that they were both standing side by side. It was an interesting conclusion when Irsay kind of gave Peyton a little mini hug and then patted him on the back a few times as they walked out and into the doors. And, from there it's into the unknown. I mean, we don't know what Andrew Luck can or can't be. He could be a phenomenal quarterback. He could be the next Manning. Or he could be a bust, or somewhere in between. And with Manning, Joe Montana was successful in Kansas City, but he didn't replicate the success he had with the 49ers. In Brett Favre, the Jets got a guy who came flying out of the gate and then failed at the end, and the Jets failed to make the playoffs, and Favre was gone. And then he reemerged in Minnesota and led them to the NFC title game. But it's just the settings. We had talked about this earlier about the media, being comfortable in his surroundings. It's a whole new adjustment, and then you throw on the injuries, and we don't know. So my question to you is, how much do you believe that Peyton Manning has in the tank if, and the key word is if, he's healthy?
I mean, they say on ESPN and NFL Network that 90% of Peyton is better than anybody's 100%. I completely agree with that. But what if Peyton's 70%? Then, then he's in the mid-tier of quarterbacks, and you're going to have to pay this guy a ton of money. He probably deserves it, if he is healthy. Your judgment call has to be on what do you consider is Peyton's health, because he's not just recovering from surgery, he's also in his mid-30s. You have to have realistic expectations if you're going to bring a guy like this in, and then you hear the reports that the Dolphins are going to be extremely hard in negotiations with him. The Seahawks are going to try hard. The Redskins are going to try hard. You need to realize that your franchise is basically taking a 2-year gap where that is your window. Contrary to popular belief, he didn't do everything he did on his own.
Oh, of course. And, the question I would have with that, and I think you make a great valid point that I've been contemplating as well, that 2 to 3 year gap. And I think 3 years tops is what you're looking at if everything goes beautifully. I don't think he's a Brett Favre who's going to play into his 40s. I just don't see that, especially coming off of major neck surgeries. But with that being said, is he, at this stage of his career, good enough to win you a Super Bowl? Or if you're a team like the Dolphins or the Chiefs or the Cardinals, is it good enough to just be relevant and a contender again? Because if Manning can automatically make you a contender, then is it worth it to put a guy like in Arizona, like John Skelton on the bench or Kevin Cobb on the bench and say, you're going to have to wait a couple of years, or for, Washington to draft a quarterback and tell them he's going to have to sit? I think in a perfect world, you draft a quarterback and you let him sit behind Manning, and if the Manning experiment fails, you have that guy to go to. You have to have both. If you just put all your eggs in Manning's basket, you're setting yourself up for failure.
And I would agree with that, Scott. If Peyton was to go to a place like Arizona, Kevin Cobb would not be there. He's got a $7 million roster bonus that's due March 17th, I believe. But then again, Skelton's shown that he can win you games in relief. The Seahawks are another good example. Tavares Jackson's not going to scare anybody, but he's won in this league. He did a pretty decent job with them last year. He didn't lose them games. Matt Moore played very well down the stretch with the Dolphins. So, there are options out there where you're going to have not necessarily an established guy, but a guy that you can get by with behind Peyton. And I think those are probably the best destinations for both Peyton and for the team.
And I also think there's no doubt about it that Peyton sells tickets, Peyton sells jerseys. Peyton puts your franchise in the heart of the spotlight, and especially if it goes to a team like the Dolphins where you have them playing Tom Brady and the Patriots twice a year, and then you've got them playing the Jets twice a year. I mean, that would be, or even if he played in New York with the Jets, you're talking about incredible hype. Now, whether Manning wants that or not is a different story. But I think that all has to be factored into whatever contract he's given, regardless of if he ever even takes a snap for that team, that you're instantly getting the media circus and your team becomes the most talked about team in the sport.
And I think you're correct, but I also think that Peyton's been in a relatively small market his entire career. But I think local coverage and local media and local fan bases have to play a big factor in what Peyton wants to do.
And it's going to be interesting to see it play out. We've never seen a free agent like this hit the NFL market. If you made Peyton Manning a little younger and a little healthier, this is LeBron James hitting the free agency market. We'll see what happens. We'll see if Manning takes his talents to South Beach or if he goes to Seattle, Washington, New York, wherever. For Mike K, I am Scott Jacobs. You've been listening to Juiced Sports Radio, the end of an era in Indianapolis. Have a good night, everybody.